long before the Van Cortlandts carved their Georgian manor into the stone spine of the Bronx, before George Washington's troops bivouacked on its meadows and enslaved millers ground wheat beside Tibbetts Brook. This land belonged to a Dutchman with an unruly mind and an inconvenient dream. His name was Adriaen van der Donck, a brilliant lawyer, landowner, political thinker, and perhaps the most influential New Yorker you've never heard of. Born around 1618 in the Dutch Republic, van der Donck studied law at Leiden University, the intellectual heart of the Dutch Golden Age. He was a man of restless intellect and individualistic spirit, likely influenced by the philosophical tides of the time. Under the influence of Descartes, he echoed the sentiment. As soon as my age permitted me to pass from under the control of my instructors, I entirely abandoned the study of letters and resolved no longer to seek any other science than the knowledge of myself. The expected path for a young man of his education and rank was clear. A quiet life as a magistrate, marriage, maybe a chair at university. But the call of the new world proved too seductive. Had he desired to pursue wealth, van der Donck might have sought a position in the regimented ranks of the Dutch East or West India companies. But he found the corporate ladder too slow, too stifling. He wanted something wild and uncertain. Possibly spurred by recruitment pamphlets circulating through Europe, he learned of a raw new colony in need of educated men. At a time when the Dutch West India Company governed New Netherland as both a trading venture and a de facto government, settlers were needed to make the colony viable. The company wielded immense power. It could mint currency, raise armies, sign treaties and grant land, all without consulting the Dutch Parliament. The opportunity came through Kiliaen van Rensselaer, a diamond merchant and patroon who had expanded his holdings near present-day Albany to hundreds of thousands of acres. When van der Donck wrote requesting a position, Van Rensselaer likely saw him as a rare prize, someone educated, driven and willing to brave the unknown. New Netherland had no lawyers. Van der Donck would be its first. He was appointed scout, a kind of sheriff magistrate, and given the task of enforcing order. His duties included cracking down on black market grain trading, tracking down runaway servants, and policing the lucrative but unsanctioned beaver pelt economy. But van der Donck soon proved too principled and too independent for his employer's liking. In one telling incident, he was sent to retrieve a pregnant indentured servant who had fled before completing her contract. Upon reaching Manhattan, van der Donck took pity on her and allowed her to stay. Van Rensselaer was livid. "It is your duty to seek my advantage and protect me against loss," he wrote, revealing his view of justice as merely profit protection. But van der Donck had already begun forging his own code, one rooted not in loyalty to commerce, but in a deeper sense of justice. The intellectual heart of the Dutch Golden Age. Unlike many of his contemporaries, van der Donck took a genuine interest in the Native American nations around him, particularly the Mahicon and Lenape. He studied their customs, languages, governance structures and diplomacy. He envisioned a society in which Dutch settlers and in indigenous communities might coexist, not through domination but mutual recognition. In 1646, van der Donck was granted a massive tract of land by the Dutch West India Company. He called it Colen Donck, a feudal estate stretching across the Bronx and into what is now Yonkers. The name Yonkers itself is a corruption of Jonker, referring to van der Donck's title, meaning young lord or squire. On this estate he built mills, encouraged agriculture, and laid the groundwork for a self-sustaining colonial settlement. He was more than a landlord. He was a planner, a proto-urbanist, envisioning a structured society rooted in law and natural harmony. But van der Donck was also a thorn in the side of the authorities. He clashed with Peter Stuyvesant, the authoritarian Director General of New Netherland, and took up the pen as his weapon. In 1650, van der Donck returned to the Netherlands to lobby for political reform in New Netherland. He wrote and presented the Remonstrance of New Netherland, a remarkable document that argued for local democratic governance, civil liberties, and an end to company mismanagement. His plea was clear: New Netherland should become a true society, not merely a company town. Van der Donck's writings infuriated the Dutch West India Company but won the admiration of the States General, the Dutch governing body. For a moment it appeared he had triumphed. The States General ordered reforms and seemed poised to curtail Stuyvesant's authority. Van der Donck was even poised to return to New Netherland as a public advocate, possibly as a new leader. But his victory was short-lived. The brutal aftermath of Kieft's War, a disastrous campaign waged by Stuyvesant's predecessor against the Lenape, had already destabilised the colony. And now, the looming threat of English expansion, especially from the north and east, put the Dutch government on edge. The shot that sank Van der Donck's mission, robbing him of a major historical achievement and leaving him instead a spectral presence in the margins of history, was fired not from a musket but from the pen of Oliver Cromwell. During the English Civil War, trade between England and its North American colonies had collapsed, and Manhattan had grown in consequence. It was no longer a fringe outpost, but a coveted strategic prize. While Van der Donck was shifting from his victory and petitioning the States General to let him return to New Netherland, English and Dutch fleets clashed in the Straits of Dover. The Dutch Republic transitioned to a war footing. Orders went out to ships at sea to tighten defences. In a stunning reversal, the States General rescinded its recall of Stuyvesant and ordered Van der Donck to return the letter of authority that had promised him political elevation. His momentum evaporated, his cause lost traction, and he, whose star had briefly risen, found himself detained, refused permission to return to the colony he had tried to reform. Peter Stuyvesant, ever the authoritarian, must have taken grim pleasure in watching his rival's momentum stall. The two men could not have been more different. Stuyvesant, rigid and militaristic. Van der Donck, philosophical and reformist. Their clash was not just personal, it was ideological. One believed in control, the other in consent, and in the end, empire chose control. During this same period, Van der Donck authored A Description of New Netherland, one of the most vivid and comprehensive accounts of 17th century North America ever written. The man simply fell in love with America. He saw its promise, its vastness, its raw energy, not just as territory to be claimed, but as a place that could give birth to something new in the history of governance and society. His prose was part ethnography, part naturalist's diary, and part political manifesto. He described the landscape with awe, the native peoples with empathy, and the future with startling prescience. From Eastern Europe, Westphalia, Scandinavia and Wallonia, who having steeped themselves in the Dutch tolerance will populate the colony, increasing its multi-ethnic flavour in strength and vigour. To read Van der Donck is to witness a mind alive with the possibilities of America, not as a place of conquest, but of coexistence, commerce and civic life. But history has a way of swallowing its heretics. At last, late in 1653, 4 years after his arrival in the Netherlands, Van der Donck was granted permission to return to America. He had not seen his family in all that time. But the permission came at a price. The forces that once hailed him as a beacon of Dutch enlightenment now branded him a danger to the colonial order. The man who once sought to build a democratic society in the wilderness was no longer welcome as a political figure, only as a quiet landholder. He faded into obscurity. In 1655, during a period of violent conflict known as the Peach Tree War, he disappeared. Some believe he was killed by native warriors. Others whisper that Stuyvesant's agents may have had a hand in his vanishing. There is no grave, no official cause of death, just the silence of forests and streams that once bore his name. It is here, located just outside the Van Cortlandt house, that historians and preservationists suspect to be the remains of Van der Donck's original home. In 1910, New York City sewer workers digging a trench in the area uncovered the foundation of what was later identified as a 17th century farmhouse. A 1667 map of the area labelled the site as Van Donck's, a likely reference to Van der Donck. The only formal archaeological excavation carried out in 1990 uncovered a fascinating trove: Dutch bricks, Delftware pottery shards, leaded glass window frames, iron tools, combs, mirrors and even wampum beads. a form of local currency and trade among indigenous peoples. If the evidence holds true, it would mean that after his return from the Netherlands, Van der Donck may have perished here, caught in the crossfire of one of the many conflagrations between the native tribes and the encroaching settlers. His physical presence still anchors this land, beneath the roots of the very estate that would come to erase him. Adriaen van der Donck's vision for New Netherland was ahead of its time. His belief in democratic self-rule, pluralism and legal structure predated the American Revolution by more than a century. Many scholars now view the Remonstrance as an early intellectual ancestor of the US Constitution. In its passionate defence of representation and personal freedom, it anticipated the democratic principles that would later shape America. And yet he remains largely forgotten, a ghost in the foundation of the city he helped imagine. But look closely. His fingerprints are everywhere in the name of Yonkers, in the blueprint of civic governance, in the shape of the very land where Cortlandt Park now sits. He was a visionary, a rebel, a forgotten founder, and perhaps, at long last, it's time we remember him. If you enjoyed this journey into a forgotten chapter of American history, be sure to give the video a thumbs up and share your thoughts on Adriaen van der Donck, New Netherland, and the indelible Dutch colonial legacy that still shapes New York. And stay tuned for part 2, where we will explore the Van Cortlandt House, the oldest home in the Bronx, built by a family of Dutch merchants who rose to colonial prominence. Subscribe for more stories of hidden histories, overlooked visionaries, and the architecture that stand witness to the city's birth.